This is Alabama Politics with Steve Flowers, an in-depth interview with Alabama's top political newsmakers. Now, from the studios of Troy University, here is Steve Flowers.
I'm Steve Flowers, and welcome to Alabama Politics. Folks, we're very fortunate tonight to have as our guest one of the stalwart, stellar members of the state school board and one of the great public servants in the state of Alabama, Stephanie Bell from here in Montgomery. She's not only a great public servant, she's a beautiful lady too. She's a Montgomeryan through and through, and it's been 6 years since she was on the show last. Stephanie Bell is the longest serving member. Now, does that mean she's the oldest? She's just the longest serving. She went on at a young age, but the longest serving tenured member of the Alabama State School Board, Board of Education. Stephanie, good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Stephen. You made my day, my year, my week, everything.
Well, you're like a movie star. I'm so proud to have you on the show.
Well, it's an honor to
and
be
time flies by, doesn't it?
It does fly by. And
it's been 6 years ago when you were on here last time.
It seems like yesterday. And of course, you never change, so.
Thank you.
It feels like yesterday.
Stephanie, you know, you grew up here in Montgomery. Tell our viewers about your growing up years, where you went to school and everything, because you're a Montgomery, and a lot of our viewing audience is here in Montgomery. And then we'll get into what your district encompasses too. But you grew up from first grade on here in Montgomery, didn't you?
I did. I went to Bear School. I had Mrs. Camp as my first grade teacher.
You remember your first grade teacher?
I do. I remember practically every one of my teachers. And teachers have, as you know, a great impact on children's lives. But then I went to Dan Lee Elementary School. The day that they opened the doors, we had to carry our lunches because the lunchroom was not even ready. That was in second grade. It was new.
So you only went to Bear for 1 year?
We only went to Bear for 1 year because of the zoning and the changes in our area. But then I went to Cloverdale. And my husband actually went to Cloverdale. I didn't know him at the time.
Are y'all about the same age?
No, he's a little bit older. But he went there from first grade through the 9th grade. I went there from, of course, 7th through 9th grade. We called it junior high school then.
Right, Cloverdale, yeah.
And then I went to a brand new, pretty much brand new, Jeff Davis High School, which has now been renamed. My 4 brothers and I all attended and graduated from Jefferson Davis High School.
Well, you're younger than me, but the same era somewhat, in that I grew up in Troy and was so close to Montgomery. We came here for everything, for shopping and medical and everything, but Troy people would. But the football, when you were talking about Cloverdale Junior High School, me being an athlete in high school, we would follow Lee and Lanier, and then when Jeff Davis finally started, we actually played Jeff Davis in basketball. Remember one time?
I may have been there.
You may have been in Chile.
Because, well, I may have been part of that whole big picture because it was an exciting time in Montgomery, Alabama. Basketball was big, as you know. And, of course, Jeff Davis was became a powerhouse.
Well, before that, though, before they had Jeff Davis, and this is for your era, but I was kind of halfway behind, Lee and Lanier was so dominant in every sport.
Absolutely.
I mean, the Birmingham schools would come down here and get beat 35-0, and Lee and Lanier would play for the state championship. But when you were talking about Cloverdale, I would ask people, I said, why has Montgomery got such a good sports program for basketball and football? They had coaches teaching those kids at Cloverdale Junior High School the plays. Yes. Did you know that? They would run the same play system so that when they got to Lee and Lanier's 9th and 10th graders, they didn't have to learn a playbook. It was a training ground. Did you know that?
I didn't know that because at the time, obviously, I was focused on many other things. But my brothers, with 4 brothers, you find out a lot more than you would otherwise. But one he played football there. And then he became a trainer for Coach Livings at Jeff Davis.
He became a legend.
Oh yes, well the Livings were both Mr. and Coach and Mrs. Livings, and actually she was a coach too. But the fact that it was one of those schools that helped to prepare young men and women for sports. Women were actually becoming more involved in sports as well, not just cheerleading. Not that that's because that's a big sport, but whole Montgomery area, because Cloverdale, as you also know, was a feeder to Lanier,
Right.
and a little bit possibly to Lee because of the big area that it covered. But those coaches were great, and they demanded discipline.
Yeah.
And I still hear the stories about my friends who got the board even if they didn't misbehave, because it was part of that process of growing up. Some of the nicest young men, and they were very sweet and nice then, but the board was part of that institution, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was actually, like you laughed, it was one of those things. It was just part of it.
It was. Stephanie, now after Jeff Davis, where did you go to college?
I went to Auburn University, and I did spend some time
AUM
at
had
AUM.
just started, hadn't it?
It did.
But you went over to the main campus.
And
Did
it
you
was-
major in education?
No, I actually majored in English.
And you became
in
a writer,
journalism.
didn't you?
Yes, I
Your
wrote.
first job was with the Advertiser, wasn't it?
It was with, well, my first real job in that area was actually as a high school student. I wrote a column that people still remember to this day called Tune in Teens. And then after I left, Mrs. Spencer, Madeira Spencer, who is well known.
Oh, yeah,
is,
she wrote
just-
the social stuff.
She gave me an opportunity as a sophomore in high school to write a weekly column.
And you started writing a column as a sophomore in high school?
I did.
It was called what?
Tune
teen?
in Teens,
Tune In
because I was
Teens.
so tired of hearing about negative things about teenagers, my peers, and I knew all these wonderful things were going on, and not only in the schools, but in the churches, in the community. Many young people were doing great things, and they needed to have, people needed to know about it. There needed to be a
So
voice
you were
for
writing
the
as a sophomore
positive.
in high school.
I was. And then when I went to Taiwan to teach English to adult Chinese, and actually it was a mix of Asian students, but primarily
Were you
with the
married at this
Chinese.
time? This is before
No,
you married?
I was not. This is before I was married and before I even met John. But it was a great experience, and I found out when I returned to Montgomery that we also had a great community and they had formed this wonderful organization called Friends of Free China, and I became a member of Friends of Free China. Many military generals and just wonderful people who had actually helped to start the China Airlines.
All your life, Maxwell's been a major part of Montgomery.
Yes, Maxwell, when my parents, when we moved here, they started sponsoring foreign, actually you would call them dignitaries, because many of them, again, went on to leadership positions in their own countries, but I had that benefit. It was a wonderful experience as a child. At the time, I didn't appreciate it. I did, but not really until I look back and I think, wow.
So you had been writing in high school, so you knew you wanted to major in English at Auburn.
Absolutely. English journalism, and I had some incredible mentors. Just Auburn, even now, of course, has a wonderful journalism department. I know Troy does too. And I was
Especially in TV, Troy does.
Yes, they do. It was fantastic, but also in print journalism at the time. Print journalism is very different, as you know,
it is.
now. But it
A lot
was
of digital.
It was my first love, and I loved it. And
Did you go to China and then you came back to work for the Advertiser?
well, I actually went back to school, finished school, and then went to work I was working for the power company for a short time.
Here in
It was
Montgomery.
and they were wonderful,
Here in
dear
Montgomery.
friends that I still have today. But across the street was the office, and I went to meet with Ray Jenkins, and he offered within the week. I had a job, and from then on it was just a wonderful experience. The
Were you
Martins were
writing
there.
kind of political stuff too?
Yes, I actually covered everything from the governor's office to the county commission, the police beat, which was a wonderful experience.
Was this in the 80s?
This was actually in the late 70s and early 80s, yes.
So you remember when I came to the legislature?
I do. I wrote about you. I wrote about
Did
the
you?
legislature, yes.
Oh gosh, I came in
Yes.
'82.
I do. I remember, and your name was mentioned quite often because, as you know, you were right there in the center of everything. So.
Well, my freshman year, I really had more influence than I would normally because I was Wallace's representative. You know, Wallace was in his last term, and I had Barber County in my district. I had Pike and Barber, so I was close to the governor. So he would put me on different good committees. So you was, I ought to remember that, but you covered the Capitol.
I did.
And then you met John Bell, who's a lawyer here.
Yes, there was a reporter who had, she wanted to take a sabbatical, and so I was able to cover the courts, and she had covered the courts for years, and when she returned, she covered the courts again. But in the meantime, John and I met. He was in the DA's office, and I was very impressed.
He's never been a judge, so he was a DA and then just went into private practice.
Well, he was a district attorney, and then he was nominated to be, and he became U.S. Attorney under Ronald Reagan.
I had forgotten
Yes.
that. So he was U.S. Attorney under Reagan.
Yes, he was. And so he prosecuted some big cases. I remember one morning having to watch television, and they had sharpshooters on the tops of the buildings around here, and I was watching my husband go to work because it was, and he was up against F. Lee Bailey, a well-known name.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of the
Was
biggest
Bailey
drug.
here?
Yes, he was defending the drug dealer, not really the drug gang. It was the night before we'd had to turn our lights on, and they had security outside because the mother of one of the witnesses was shot over 100 times.
Here in Montgomery?
In Florida.
Okay.
But they
had they moved?
they knew,
was it a Florida case? They moved up here?
No, it was an Alabama
case.
case. We still have that trafficking, but this was a major case. And
Were they based out of Mexico?
We won. The U.S. won.
Great. Was it? Now, Judge Johnson, Judge Varner had retired by that time, though, hadn't they?
I don't know the specifics.
Okay.
John could answer all of
Myron
that.
was there, yeah.
But yes.
So then he went into private practice after being a U.S. Attorney.
Well, he went to work. He had many opportunities, thankfully, because that, as you know, is a political appointment.
Right.
And he went into working with a friend who was with Regions Bank. And so he was with Regions Bank for a long, long time.
Yeah. Okay. He was in-house counsel, Regions. Well, now, Stephanie, when you and John Bell married, y'all had children soon thereafter? You became a stay-home mom. Is that what you did?
Well, pretty much, but you know, moms don't actually. Our son was born with some difficulties.
How many children do y'all have?
We have 3 daughters and 1 son in heaven.
The son was the first.
Yes. And so now we have grown-up daughters, and I know you how.
2 daughters.
Yes.
You
And
remember
they're
that
wonderful.
because both of them are in Vestavia.
Yes.
They're in your district.
They are, and they're gorgeous. They're
Thank
beautiful, and your
you.
grandchildren.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
And you know that.
Yeah, well, they're part
I
of
love
my
seeing
life, you know.
pictures.
But as you know, now 6 years has transpired so much. I'm not sure one of your daughters was not still in school then. Tell everybody how they're doing, where they are, and everything.
Well, at that time, I believe she may have been in dental school at UAB, the youngest.
I think that's right.
The other 2, we have one daughter who went to Samford undergrad, the University of Alabama School of Law for law school, and she's back here in Montgomery.
Practicing
married,
law here.
And she has we have 2 wonderful granddaughters, and she's expecting actually the grandson. So
Now, does she practice law?
and she is an attorney with the state.
Okay,
so
now is her husband a lawyer too?
his family owns Green Thumb Nursery.
Okay, I mean,
Harwell
it's not
family.
handy, is it?
No, it's the Harwell family.
Harwell,
Will
that's right,
Harwell,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they're wonderful.
Yeah.
So yes.
So that's your older daughter.
That's our oldest daughter,
Uh-huh.
and our middle daughter is actually she graduated from Auburn University's the pharmacy school, Harrison School of Pharmacy. She is a doctor of pharmacy, and then she is with a hospital she lives in Pasadena, California, but she's with the hospital in LA County, Los Angeles County. And she also does commercials, short films, and so you may have seen her in some of the commercials. One of the commercials was on during the Final Four when Auburn played in Minneapolis. So
Your young daughter finished dental school?
And our youngest daughter actually finished dental school at UAB, went on to a residency program at Children's Hospital of Colorado, and is a pediatric dentist, and she now practices she does some in Charleston, South Carolina, and lives in Greenville, and she practices there as well. And she's about to get married, and so they will be possibly moving.
We have the oldest daughter's here.
Yes.
And your 3 grandchildren.
And our grandchildren are here.
Well, Stephanie, tell me now, after you and at what point did you get into running for the state school board? And what year was it when you first were elected?
And that's a really good question, because I never thought I would run for anything
Anything.
necessarily. I did get involved in the youth legislature program, and I did run
When you were in high
for
school?
governor, yes, when I was in high school. But I was not one of those that's going to be my life.
Right.
But I did appreciate government more, although when I started covering it, it was totally different from when I was in youth legislature. But that said, in 1994, we had a district. Actually, the Republicans only had one seat, and that was
So
Betty
the
Fiden
party
Collins.
change hadn't occurred really that much yet. It's a little
No.
bit, but not on the state board.
I ran in a Democrat-dominated district.
As a Republican?
As a Republican. I did not get into the race until after the primary. The person who had qualified and gone through the primary asked me if I would take his place on the ballot. The Republican Party approved that change, so I jumped in, literally, in the latter part of July, really more into August.
And
Did the
election was in
organization,
November,
and
the
the
general
election was in November.
You running against a Democrat.
I ran against a two-term he was running for his third term, I believe, and he owned a bank right in the middle of the district. Certainly had the resources.
Is that the Poole seat? Is that the Poole?
No, that was actually,
Old man Poole serving on the state
and
board.
he did. He was from Moundville.
Right,
So he was in a different district. My
Uh-huh.
district at that time went from Montgomery up the border
That's what I was
along
gonna ask
Georgia,
you.
but up the interstate as well. So I had everything. I had Chilton County, Otago County, Elmore County, and then it went over to Clay, Coosa, you name it, Randolph County.
Uh-huh.
And so it was a very different district, up all the way up to Cleburne County and Calhoun County. So St. Clair County was in it. Now my district goes up the interstate. This is the 4th district after redistricting, because shortly after I was elected in 1994, they redistricted. They also changed the structure of the board from concurrent terms, like the legislature is
Right.
elected,
Uh-huh.
to staggered terms.
Uh-huh.
And so now we have 4 and 4.
You have to
and
have a total of 8 members.
yes, we have 8 members, and then the governor serves.
Now she's pretty active, isn't she?
She has been she has
Uh-huh.
been the most active as far as
Most
chairing.
governors have never attended those board meetings.
And
right?
when I was the chairman, when she was first elected, she would come and go, but she wouldn't chair. I would still help with the as chair
Uh-huh.
for the most part. She eased into that, and so she has been coming for some meetings and not for others when we have to vote on something that's a big
Have
issue.
y'all had some controversial votes that she's been involved in that she made a difference in? And that sort?
Not necessarily a
Not
difference,
uh-huh.
but she was able to use her voice to say, this is what I support.
Uh-huh.
And we may not have had a unanimous decision, but it certainly makes a difference, as you know. when
So
the
you
governor's
won
there.
that 94 race and then you won again 98, that's 2002, 2006,
Well,
2010.
I had to run for a 2-year term.
Oh, so
after
how many
my
times do you
first.
run then?
This is my 8th term.
You'll be running this year in 2024.
Yes,
Oh, in the
for
coming
9th term, but
And you will have been on 20 years.
28 years.
28, I can't even add right.
That's okay.
Yeah,
It's hard,
28.
especially with that. You have 4-year terms,
Uh-huh.
and then you have that 1 2-year term.
28 years on the state school.
But no, actually, it'll be more than that by the time it'll be 30.
30, huh?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And so I'll be the longest serving, and already I'm the longest serving elected school board member. Victor Poole, certainly, he was part of the appointed board, so
Right.
we would be pretty much in a tie for the longest term, but he had a little bit of his term, or his multiple terms, he was appointed.
That brings me to a question.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Alabamians seem to like to elect all their officials.
Yes.
And there's always a debate about judicial jobs and your job, whether they should be appointed or elected. And what's your thinking on that? Do you think it's good that y'all are elected, or do you think it's because it's such a big district and y'all make such little money? I don't see how you have to dig in your own pocket to pay to run for the office, and you know it doesn't pay you anything. I wrote a column, as you know, several months ago, about how y'all are real public service. But back to my question, do you think you have the governor would have an inordinate amount of influence if y'all were appointed. What's your thoughts on, I'm not trying to ask you thoughts on the judicial, because you're
No,
not
I
in
understand.
judiciary, but the State Board of Education. And a compound question, you may not know this, but ballpark, are most state school boards appointed or elected? Do you know?
Well, you have, actually probably most of them are elected, but you have a mix at the local level, and that's actually, as you know, because of local
Right.
legislation and certain restrictions, and you may have, people are changing actually to change those to elected, and they did that recently with some of the elected superintendents, and they're actually having some issues because the elected superintendents at the local level were very responsive to people. And so often you hear in the news that we live in a democracy. We live in a republic. And the republic was set up to be representative government. And the best representation is good or bad, but you can vote them out just as easily as you can vote them in. And sometimes it's not that easy because you know there's so much money involved in these races, even state school board races, which makes you wonder why people would put so much money in a race for a job that pays after taxes. You get about $1,200 a month, and it's actually, the law says that it's for expenses. It's your expense allowance, not a salary. And you don't get, I've had people call and they're interested in the job and they will say, well, how much insurance do you get? None. Do you get a car? No.
You get insurance?
You get retirement? No. But I didn't run for those reasons. It goes back to your question. Public service is supposed to be public service. And you don't go after a job because you want to pay. I didn't know it paid anything, frankly, and that's the truth. When somebody asked me to run, I looked for other people to run. And one of those ended up running for the legislature later and actually was elected to the legislature. But they said, well, why don't you run? And when the party chairman turns to you and says, yes, you run. And I said, well, I'll need help. But we didn't have a whole lot of money. We had a lot of people working. And that's what happens when you have people involved with those who are elected. 80%, more than 80% of the people, when it was placed on the ballot recently, and you remember that,
it was turned down.
Turned down. People want to have a voice, and they need to have a voice. And I would still, whether I'm serving on the state school board or in any other capacity or not at all, we need to have elected representatives, and I hope that they act like their representatives.
Stephanie, currently your district, and it was the same, I think, when we spoke 6 years ago, it starts in Montgomery, and you have all the Republican areas of Montgomery, but you go north and get all the way into Jefferson, Shelby. You have all of Shelby, don't you?
And actually my district has changed a bit from 6 years ago, because that means that is the fourth. I now serve in the fourth formation of my district. But my district, I don't have as much of Montgomery as I had from the very beginning. In fact, there was an attempt, well, actually last time, the people across the street from me could not even vote. Isn't that right? Strange? I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't gerrymander anything because I had no control over how my district, there was an attempt to try to get a few of us out, but I think in my case it was actually innocent. I think they didn't realize exactly what was happening, but they, you know how they draw those maps.
What is it, 6 Republicans or 5?
No, we actually have, yes, we have 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats. But my district goes, I don't have Otago County anymore. I do have still Elmore County. I now have Pike Road in Montgomery County. So I've actually added different parts of Montgomery County that I didn't have.
They made it a more Republican district.
Well,
or more partisan district.
Well, it's been.
Yours is a very Republican
pretty much
district, yeah.
Republican because of the changes within counties like Chilton County. I have Bibb County, and Mike Oakley, of course, is the mayor of a big city.
Right.
He was on the local school board before he became
he
mayor.
Sure was.
And knows
he and Jim are good friends of mine.
They're great.
I know.
They're great. But I'm delighted to have that added in. I had a little sliver of it before. I have all of Shelby County. I have my youngest brother has lived in Shelby County.
There's a lot of people in Shelby County.
Yes, and it's growing, as you know.
Oh, I mean, Shelby's probably 25% of your district.
And they increased the part, it's a big part, but they increased the part in Jefferson County. I added more of Mountain Brook. And then in terms of Talladega County, now, I used to have all of Talladega County practically, but now it just goes up to past Sylacauga. And I have a dear friend, a sorority sister who lives in Sylacauga still, and just that would have been tough to have all of it lost, but they decided to keep that part in. And anyway, it's still a great, I have Coosa still, it's always been in my district. Again, Chilton has always been in my district, and same with Elmore County.
Well, you're doing a great job, and
Well,
I appreciate the public service you do to that. Y'all set the curriculum basically for
We
the-
do. The legislature has taken on that role more and more, which has created some difficulty. One example would be with the recent textbook selection, where we had to go back to the committee because of what the law specified. And you have a textbook committee and you have the literacy task force, which is under the governor's office pretty much. And they're two separate, so you have to make sure that when these bills are passed, that there's not going to be that kind of confusion. I hope that that's fixed. The same thing with the charter school law. There's some real problems there. People expect that we can fix it, but the legislature completely left out the state school board, except for basically a confirmation process, not the selection process for the membership, but a confirmation.
Well, Stephanie, I hate to tell you, our time's up.
Wow.
It goes by
Flew
in a hurry, doesn't it?
Yes, well, you asked such great questions.
I don't know. Well, I
So
think
thank
people enjoy getting to know who you are and everything. They probably do, because you've been on the state school board almost 30 years now. Folks, our guest tonight has been Stephanie Bell, who is the most veteran member of the state school board, not only currently, but probably in the state history. She will have, and when she finishes this term, will have served 30 years on Alabama State Board of Education. She lives here in Montgomery, and she represents a good portion of the Republican area of the middle part of the state, including Pike Road and all the way up through Jefferson and Shelby counties. We thank Ms. Bell for being with us, and we thank you viewers for watching. Hope you tune in again next week for This Week in Alabama Politics.